In response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a number of Russian banks no longer have access to the SWIFT international payment system. Now, that could open an opportunity for China's alternative cross-border interbank payment system, or CIPS, as China is Russia's leading trade partner. Unveiled in 2015, CIPS helped establish the yuan as an international currency. CIPS' aim is to allow banks to process cross-border yuan transactions directly. Now, according to Chinese official data, CIPS has some 1,200 participants from more than 100 countries and regions. That includes Russian banks and Chinese subsidiaries of Deutsche Bank. Last year, CIPS processed transactions worth almost 13 trillion US dollars. Now, Chinese media says that was a 75% increase from the previous year. Currently, CIPS, though, still relies on SWIFT for international communication. Russia's financial ties with China could increase. Cut off from old trade partners, Moscow is forced to reorganize much of its economy and trade with a focus on Beijing.
It's been a month since the Winter Olympics opened in Beijing with fireworks and Chinese President Xi Jinping waving proudly from the stands. Abandoned by most international leaders, Xi had only one prominent visitor, Russia's Vladimir Putin, who certainly knew at the time that the relation between the two powerful nations would soon change. That's because Russia needs China after the West has distanced itself from Moscow. Russia might be optimistic. Last year, trade with China reached a record $147 billion. It's set to reach $250 billion soon. That's 40% more than current trade volume between Russia and the EU. Currently, Russia is China's second biggest oil supplier, providing over 15% of its imports. The country also covers 5% of China's demand for natural gas. Meanwhile, the food trade has been growing fast. In 2019, China allowed the import of soybeans from Russia. Last year, it added beef to the import list, and just last week, wheat. China is also a huge buyer of timber from Russia's Far East, with imports worth over $4 billion last year. As for trade in the other direction, China sells machinery, mobile phones, cars and consumer products to Russia, with exports up 34% last year. China is also Russia's largest foreign investor, having issued at least $125 billion worth of loans for infrastructure projects that are largely tied to China's Belt and Road Initiative. As Russia counts on China as its new key trade partner, Beijing might show some hesitance, though, wary of trouble with its Western partners should it run afoul of sanctions.
For more, let's cross over to Taipei and DW correspondent So Sang-han. So how is China viewing what seems to be quite remarkable Ukrainian resistance against the Russian invasion?
China still refused to call it a Russian invasion, but rather a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It urges the Ukrainian side to assume the corresponding international responsibility and does not condemn Russia at all. But after the call between Chinese and Ukrainian foreign minister earlier, China signaled that it was ready to play the role of a peacemaker. Beijing said that Ukraine looks forward to China playing a role in realizing a ceasefire. At the same time, when Russia called China as its friend, the related Chinese Twitter Weibo by Russian state media Sputnik was deleted shortly afterwards. Many Chinese citizens said that we're not friends, don't pull China down like this, don't want to be friends with the aggressor, and others worry that such statements would be detrimental to the safety of Chinese people in Ukraine.
Now, on the economic front, China has vowed to strengthen ties with Russia. What does that look like now that Western sanctions against Moscow are starting to bite?
Well, we have seen Chinese economic and financial support for Russia. Even though China does not directly support Russia's expansionism to any degree, Beijing strongly feels the necessity to maintain and boost strategic partnership with Moscow. China has been supplying electronics, machinery, and other manufactured goods to Russia in exchange for food and energy. On the first day of Russia's attack on Ukraine, China suddenly announced that it would allow the import of wheat throughout the territory of Russia, which was partly already banned due to contamination problems. But we are not sure if China will further help Russia because it is in a difficult position and needs to strike a delicate balance with the Chinese government more than willing to avoid any action that could easily expose China to further sanctions.
So, speaking of possible partnership, now that a number of Russian banks have been kicked off the international payment system SWIFT, are China and Russia going to link both of the national financial transaction systems each one has been putting up?
Despite the fact that Russia and China have strengthened the de-dollarization of local currency settlement in recent years, Russia and China still rely heavily on SWIFT for cross-border settlement payments. In 2017, Commercial Bank of China launched its renminbi clearing bank business in Moscow. A number of Russian banks have joined it, and Russian-Chinese gas, oil, and gold transactions can be settled in renminbi. But even if the settlement and payment information of China and Russia can be exchanged within the country by passing SWIFT, the cross-border exchange can only be done through SWIFT. Besides, in order to promote the internationalization of renminbi, it is difficult for China to act independently of SWIFT. It is a very complicated issue, and we don't see how it can ease Russia's pressure in the short term.
DW correspondent So Sang-han in Taipei. So, thank you. Volkswagen and BMW are the most recent examples. The two car makers just announced they're temporarily halting production in some plants as key components are missing. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the West's sanctions against Moscow are disrupting supply chains, which are yet to recover from the coronavirus pandemic.
The closure of Russian airspace because of the invasion is set to cause massive restrictions on international air cargo and air traffic. Cargo flights and passenger aircraft to Asia have to take a different route. Lufthansa Cargo says that flights from Central Europe to Japan, Korea, and China can take up to several hours longer and can carry up to 20% less freight. This will make flights and freight more expensive. Shipping is also feeling the consequences of the war and the sanctions against Russia. The world's largest container shipping company, Maersk, suspended most container deliveries to and from the country. Freight traffic with Russia is at a standstill. Factories in Europe's biggest economy, Germany, are worried about bottlenecks, especially in raw materials and intermediate products, and possible price increases. German car makers have around 50 suppliers and manufacturing sites in Russia and Ukraine. It's still too early to predict what impact the war will have. Russia and Ukraine are among the largest exporters of wheat, accounting for about 1/3 of global exports. But these exports are now at risk, and this is hitting poorer countries in Africa and Latin America in particular, which are dependent on cheap imports.
And now to some of the other global business stories making headlines. Apple, Ford, and ExxonMobil have joined the rank of companies who halt business in Russia. Apple said it would stop the sale of iPhones and other products in the country. Ford and Exxon will suspend operations. Germany's Siemens now says it will also suspend business in Russia. Russia's biggest lender, Sberbank, is exiting the European market as Western sanctions tighten following the Russian war in Ukraine. The announcement came just hours after the European Central Bank ordered the closure of Sberbank's European arm following a run on deposits. Home rental company Airbnb says it'll offer free temporary housing for up to 100,000 refugees fleeing Ukraine. CEO Brian Jeski said sent letters to leaders of Poland, Romania, Germany, and Hungary offering help to house the people. At least 300,000 Ukrainian refugees have entered the EU since the Russian invasion began. A firm that tracks cryptocurrency transactions says more than $33 million in the digital currency has been donated to Ukraine's government and non-governmental organizations based in the country. Ukraine has received the donations mostly in the form of Bitcoin and Ethereum after making an appeal on Twitter last week after it was invaded by Russia. And as corporations around the world review their business activities in Russia, big trade gatherings are taking a stand as well. The Mobile World Congress in Barcelona is the world's biggest mobile phone show, and it's taking place this week. It has limited Russian companies' access to the event.
At the Russian stand, there's little sign of the company's country of origin. Even the name Russia has been taped over, apparently at the request of the Congress's organizers. Most of the participants here are software companies, like AVSoft from Moscow. They say sanctions are hitting the wrong targets.
Of course, I repeat, business is not connected with policy at all in modern world. So we shouldn't decide about something on not connected events together: financial, cybersecurity, business, and government. So it's different spheres at all.
One company worried about sanctions is Moscow-based TrueConf. It provides online conference software worldwide.
I think it could be significant for all Russian companies and so on.
After DW's camera was turned off, he said he'd likely have to split the company into two, one in Russia and one in the EU. The Russian war against Ukraine and sanctions are overshadowing the Mobile World Congress, at a time when participants had hoped to get back to business as usual after 2 years of the pandemic. So what's in store next for the business world?
Every industry is going to have some kind of impact. I mean, clearly we already had a geopolitical divide in the world, and this will further enhance that.
The only company from Ukraine slated to participate this year, a virtual reality studio from Kiev, wasn't able to attend because of the war.